I'm Lee Doherty Biddison.
And I'm Carolyn Kamsty Fowler, and we're your co-hosts for the Johns Hopkins Office of Wellbeing's podcast, Vital Conversations, Influencing Workplace Wellbeing in Healthcare.
We spend a lot of time thinking about how to influence workplace well-being in healthcare, and we're excited to share what we're learning.
Thank you for joining us.
Hello, and welcome to the Vital Conversations podcast. I'm Lee Biddison, Chief Wellness Officer for Johns Hopkins Medicine, and your host for this episode. Today, I am excited to welcome my colleague and friend, Brian Sexton, for a conversation about his journey to Chief Wellness Officer at Duke, as well as some highlights from things he's thinking about over his many years thinking about and studying well-being. So to tell you a little bit more about Brian, Brian is currently the Chief Wellness Officer for Duke Health Integrated Practice, as well as Director of the Duke Center for the Advancement of Wellbeing Science. He's a psychologist by training and has been a psychometrician and well-being and patient safety researcher for more than 30 years, both at Duke, where he's faculty in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Before that, at Johns Hopkins, where we first met, had a chance to work together, and became friends. In addition to all of that, he is a father of four and an aspiring, he told me to tell you, aspiring, not avid, woodworker. So, aspiring woodworker, and hopefully we'll get to a little bit of that. So, Brian, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lee. And I would say perpetually recovering father of four.
I'll add some more adjectives next time. Very fair. Well, I'm just thrilled to have this chance to talk and hear a little bit more about your journey. So, we met 20 years ago now, when I was 6, and started talking about, at the time we were talking about patient safety and some spaces, some things going on in that space here at Hopkins and in your previous research work. And that journey has really taking you into the space of well-being and its connections to patient safety and overall outcomes. But I would love it if you would just sort of describe for our audience sort of that journey, because it's such a fascinating one.
Yeah, there's some interesting parallels between like the patient safety movement and the well-being movement in healthcare. I started off doing the similar work in flight safety for commercial aviation, using funding from the FAA, looking at things like safety culture in the cockpit and how to inform training programs and how to kind of monitor and surveil safety incidents. And a lot of that methodology was being brought over to do patient safety stuff early on. And so I had a kind of a front row seat as a very young researcher, like while I was still in graduate school, to the first IOM report being released and, to errors human and a lot of kind of concerning statistics coming out about, how safe, healthcare really was. And at the same time, I had to make a decision for like literally for my PhD. Did I want to hang around and wait 75 years to see whether or not we could create an increase in flight safety, or did I want to kind of hang out in a parking lot of an ED for 2 days to see if we could, increase safety? And it was just the prevalence and severity of safety issues was just so much richer in healthcare. It was a target-rich environment, so that was a lot of fun to kind of come over and be young and figure that out. But then along the way, we kind of learned from a lot of really people who I admire greatly from Johns Hopkins, taught me a lot about how to think about, is this group ready to do quality improvement stuff? Because they seem to be struggling just in general. And I had some really potent and kind of career altering conversations with people like Lori Payne at the time there at Hopkins, and that really set me into, well, we should be measuring people's ability to do stuff. And it turns out when you're measuring well-being, what you're really looking at is people's ability to do stuff. And lo and behold, we have a bunch of metrics and stuff. You said I was a psychometrician. Just for your listeners, like
What does that mean?
a psychometrician is someone who creates metrics and then makes sure that they measure what you think that they're measuring. So we create well-being metrics and well-being interventions for busy, tired, cranky healthcare workers.
This is so important though, Brian, because I think, and it's one of the things that I learned from you
Mhm.
when we were working together, is that it's how important it is to be sure that you're measuring what you think you're measuring.
Yeah.
Just like a random question that seems okay in a conversation in which we can go back and forth and clarify what we really mean is a very different thing from a question someone takes on a survey or something like that. And you've got one chance to be sure they understand what you're asking of them and
Yeah.
that, all the components that go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a really amazing series of HR colleagues that it's been a journey to get to where we kind of mm, say and mean the same thing when we say something like engagement. I think it's common in the HR world when you say like engagement, like employee engagement. They a lot of people in HR think that that means engagement, but when you look at the data behind what's being collected by a lot of these vendors, they say it's engagement, but there's no evidence that it actually predicts turnover or predicts kind of this is really geeky, but what we talk about is what's called organizational citizenship behaviors. Like, do you steal from work, and do you kind of like do your best for every patient in every situation every day, kinds of things. So organizational like does engagement actually predict that stuff? And for the most part, the stuff that's really expensive that people pay a lot of money for, no, it's what they're paying for is a bright and shiny dashboard, but the measures behind that dashboard aren't really. There's not much there. So we're very careful, and you've done this too. Like your work, you've shown that like if you're measuring patient safety, how do we know this is patient safety? Well, it's because it actually predicts whether or not you wash your freaking hands. So that's a behavioral kind of thing that is predicted by what people report on a survey. And if you're going to measure things, like if you're going to take the time, this is something that this person will go nameless, but it was a very uh, interesting entrance for me into the Hopkins world fresh out of my training was, a surgeon pulled me aside and he said, "You're about to go give grand rounds at Johns Hopkins. You're gonna stand right there at that podium, and you're gonna waste the time of all of these really important, busy people, so whatever you do, you be useful." And and every I literally, I can't make, any GME slides, or I can't make a PowerPoint deck now without having that echo in my head, like, "Is this useful? Is this really useful?" And so that has really shaped, this idea of when you're doing the research or you're creating the measure or you're gonna put something in on a questionnaire and take the time of busy distracted healthcare workers, make sure it's useful, make sure that it's
Yeah.
important, make sure that it's relevant, make sure that it's an actual outcome, like not engagement in quotation marks, but engagement because it predicts lower disruptive behavior rates, fewer communication breakdowns, lower turnover, right? Things that you can measure independently and link it back. But I could never in the patient safety world and the well-being world just say this is well-being, trust me, because I say it's well-being, it's well-being. So when we say psychometrician, it's we want to make sure that we measure what we think we're measuring.
I love that. Thank you for expounding on that because I think it's
Yeah.
really important. But we got you off track.
Yes.
So had made it from flight safety to patient safety. And then what happened? Conversation with Lori Payne.
So it was a pivotal moment in my career where I was sitting in her office um and we were looking at the data. At the time, this was about putting bloodstream infection protocols in every ICU in the known universe. It was like that was the goal. Like we will put these protocols in every ICU. And we were looking at the kind of about a third, I think it was like 35% of the ICUs, they either stayed the same or they got worse despite putting this protocol in. And in every single one of those kind of failures to launch, in every single one, there were moderate to high levels of burnout amongst the staff. And the question then became, well, why are we wasting time in one out of every three of these kind of interventions, 1 out of every 3 of these applications of this protocol, why don't we do some pre-work? Why don't we make sure that we're putting gas back in the tank before we give them the new stuff to do? And that kind of became its own thing. So I started my role at Duke as the director of the Patient Safety Center, and very quickly, over 90% of my time was spent getting teams ready to do quality, which meant well-being. And so that kind of evolved into well-being that way.
It seems as we talk about it like such a no-brainer, but it's been a real barrier, I think, in the patient safety space, that readiness for change concept. We was talking a lot to another colleague that we work with very closely here, Michelle Eakin, who does a lot of work in
Mhm.
implementation science.
Yeah, yeah.
And, the real challenges, especially like if we think about, I mean, this has been true over the arc of the time we've been talking about, but especially like post-COVID,
Mm.
trying to get anybody to engage in implementing anything new, changing
Oh,
something,
yeah.
doing a new procedure. People were so exhausted. They
Yeah,
absolutely did not have the capacity
yeah.
to engage in whatever that was, and no amount of hand-wringing and shouting and, jumping up and down is gonna motivate people
That's
to
right.
do that if they're not in a place where they're ready to engage.
Yeah, I would go one further and say that 2025 was a year that did a whole 'nother number on the well-being of, in particular, academic medicine.
Yeah.
Um, but it was so much harder in so many ways than COVID, for so many, people, in this field. This is kind of fun, and if you don't mind me geeking out for a second, there's a really brilliant social psychologist. Her name is Susan, Fiske, and, she famously had this line of research that says kind of attention follows power. So, secretaries know more about bosses than bosses know about secretaries. Nurses know more about physicians than physicians know about nurses. Attention follows power. And basically, the idea behind that is that kind of primates generally pay attention to other primates that might control their outcomes. So it makes sense that attention, follows power. What happened in, I think, 2025 was uh, academic medicine, science and healthcare, and in particular academic medicine, just lost a lot of momentum, lost status, basically. And when you lose status, you have to then scan your environment for other things that might possibly go wrong. So it was a very specific kind of exhaustion that people experienced in 2025, and I don't think they were aware of why they were just so, I'm not gonna say frightened, but there is a nervous energy that's behind what else might go wrong, what else might go wrong, and that's on top of your day job. So, that manifests in things like emotional exhaustion, and for other people, things like, moral injury and moral distress, and it's like, "Why am I doing this if AI is gonna take over my job anyway? Oh my gosh, what's the point?" Like, it can become very overwhelming very quickly.
Like, okay, so we have unpacked that mess a little bit.
Yes. That's why we need well-being, because there's
That's
so
what
many
we need
things.
well-being.
Yeah.
So you've been in the chief wellness officer role
Mhm.
now for 6 months. Most people might think, who've read your work, that you've been doing it for a long time, but the specific chief wellness officer role.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that transition, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about what you've been thinking about is most important in terms of what you're doing in that space.
Sure, sure. So, we've done a lot of research with, like, large data sets looking at, the prevalence and severity of different types of well-being or work-life balance, the things and healthcare workers. We've also done a lot of work with, like, randomized controlled trials showing that we can cause well-being to improve, using, and something we'll talk about here in a bit, kind of micro interventions or kind of bite-sized kind of interventions. Um, so we were doing that for a long time. Interestingly, it was going live with Epic at Duke and being ready for that kind of assault on well-being, if you will. Like, how cute to think of it like, oh, we have to get ready for all of these really, really hard things, given what has happened since then. But we wanted to be able to package um, well-being interventions in a way that would not be very burdensome for busy healthcare workers, but had good data behind them. And in so doing, it took a lot of time to, you know, to cultivate and curate these interventions so that we were, it's a 10-minute intervention that you do twice, or it's a 4-minute intervention that you do kind of 4 times. So not 45 to 60 minutes a day for the rest of your life so that you can kind of clear your head of all your woes. There's nothing wrong with meditation and yoga and diet and exercise. There's great data behind all of those things. And it's a heavy lift if you're miserable. If you're just not feeling it, like, taking on a new life skill is really hard. So we did a lot of that data, a lot of that research to kind of make it as easy as possible for the healthcare workforce, and then to kind of do those grants. And this is our Robert Wood Johnson and HRQ and NIH, and HRSA. These are all places that we would get funding from to do this research. And then, um, in 2025, things just got so crazy with well-being that instead of taking these interventions and making them available for the masses outside of Duke, the idea was we need to do more focused work internally and make sure that these things that are so popular outside of Duke are brought in a deliberate way. And that's my current role, which I'm not even 6 months in yet. That's what we're trying to do at Duke Health Integrated Practice.
That's awesome. Okay, let me ask you, as we talk, more questions pop into my head. So I'm gonna just run down this rabbit trail for just a second.
Yeah.
And as you're describing these micro interventions, and many of them are, well, happy for you to tell us about a few of them, but my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're really about sort of how managing ourselves in some way, and how we interact with with a system, right? I
Kind of. Yes, kind of. I wanna be careful about saying, like, it's your responsibility to manage your own well-being. I think at my first intervention.
Yeah, that's what I wanna get at. So the
Yeah.
micro intervention, talk to me about the interface between the micro intervention that you're describing and the systems change that
Sure.
people have, talked about. It's a big push of the National Academy of Medicine and other groups. So say a little bit more about how those pieces fit together.
Sure, yes. Now, I think that a lot of very well-intentioned, people, that had their favorite thing, which whether it was like, fitness or yoga or meditation or you name it, they came forward and they said, "Hey, you should do this because this works for me." And what it kind of began to do is point the finger at the healthcare worker to say, "You need to go be more resilient." And even the word resilience is considered kind of like, why would you put that in your title of your presentation? You're gonna just draw the ire of like 35% of your audience. We use the word well-being, instead of resilience, in all those cases. I'm sure y'all do too. And the idea now is, um, we have to do 2 things. We have to walk and chew bubblegum. The system's broken, the system has to be fixed, and it hurts so many people that it's ridiculous. Like, your colleagues, my colleagues, it's now close to 2 out of 3 of them are really suffering in their roles. So to say that we gotta fix the system is ignoring the fact that the majority of our colleagues, they need some gas back in their tank. They need a recharge. And so the question is, what are the evidence-based things that you can do to put gas back in your tank? And can it be more than just meditation, please? Can there be other things that we can do? And so there are lots of diverse things that you can lean into in kind of bite-sized, ways. One of them is spending time in nature or awe and wonder. Like, what are some things that you can do to kind of it's spending time in nature and noticing nature is a remarkably restorative thing, especially for physicians. It's a real popular one in our physicians and our APPs. But then there's other, you've probably heard of like gratitude and random acts of kindness, but there are other things that you can do. Like, there's some really cool sleep hygiene hacks that I'm kind of smitten with as someone who's struggled with, good sleep for a long time. I was really fascinated by things like I don't know if you heard of the 3-2-1 rule, but like 3 hours before bed, No more food 2 hours before you want to fall asleep, no more liquid, and 1 hour before bed. Just dim the lights. And if you just do those 3 things, it's so much easier to fall asleep and stay asleep. And these are simple things that it's just not known. And there's really good data behind it, but it's just not known. So part of our job in well-being is to embed this these interventions, these micro interventions into CMEs and CEUs, so that when you're going to gather some of this stuff just to stay current, you get the best available evidence and things that you can choose to do for yourself. So those are examples of like bite-sized things that you can do. Like the time and nature, the awe and wonder intervention that we have is super popular, and it takes 10 minutes one time.
Love it.
And we can measure differences in your well-being 2 months and 4 months and 6 months later. So that it's things like that when we say bite-sized that are so powerful. Now, put that against the backdrop of the system's broken. So what are you doing to fix the system? You don't just fix me, fix the system.
Yeah.
100%. We have to do both. It's not one or the other. And let me just pause and say, can anybody tell me what is the one thing you can do to fix the system that helps everybody? What is the one thing you can do that helps everyone? I haven't found it yet. But
That's right. That's right.
it's a lot. And so where I think that there's a happy medium between just obsessing about individual well-being and just obsessing about fixing the system is, how do we make sure that every clinic, every department, every division has not one, but a number of people that are well-being informed. The science of well-being has a concentration in that group where a leader in that area can lean into that expertise, where they know what the metrics are, they know what the interventions are. Because what you're going to do in your cath lab is going to look very different than what's going to work in peri-op, and what's going to work in surgery is going to look different than what's going to work in peds, and what's going to work in my pod may look different than what's going to work in your pod, even though we share a bathroom and a break room. And so recognizing that diversity of need, and that you need different things in different situations, the best person to do that is a local kind of well-being dignitary or a fellow or an ambassador. We call them fellows here.
Dignitary. I like that one.
Yeah. Like, oh, I think you actually you were using the word fellow. Did I get that from you?
I thought I wrote down something you said. But
Okay.
anyway, yeah, it's a great idea. We had something, not fellows, but some like similar sort of folks who are sort of leading the charge within their own departments, who can contextualize the things that are offered and think about,
right.
hey, these are different resources. And I love this concept. It's something we've spent a lot of time about. But how do we, it sort of goes back to your comment about do something useful. How do we in leading well-being approach departments and leaders and even even down to the unit level and say, we're here to support your journey, not
Mhm.
here's one more thing you need to do.
Right.
It's be sure your people aren't miserable, as if those leaders wanted them to be miserable, right? But
Yeah. Well, and by the way, if you're a leader and you're not miserable right now, you're not paying attention. I mean, there's a lot of so many leaders have lost so much autonomy that it's been a hard time
yeah,
for people in leadership positions. Um, but can I go back to something you were saying before?
sure,
You were talking about how it just became so difficult to get people to engage in quality and safety
yeah,
when they were so overwhelmed by kind of what was happening in society and what's happening
yeah,
in life. And we were doing some of the coolest randomized control trials I've ever been involved with, and I was so excited to be doing it right in the middle of Delta and Omicron, which is the worst time ever to recruit busy healthcare workers for well-being. What are you talking about? Well, this is a crisis. I can't go do your well-being intervention right now. And we learned something really profound during that time, and I'm really grateful for this. We were experimenting with different ways of incentivizing participation and well-being, and what we learned was that, there isn't really a gift card amount that's going to work to get a busy physician to do something for their own well-being.
Right.
It's not like, well, should we double that amount? Should we double that? What we found is that if you can make it minimally, if you can really say, give me 2 minutes and I'll give you a brief assessment of your well-being and I'll feed it back to you. And I'll even benchmark you and show you how you compare to your peers. Give me 2 minutes. They'll say, you know what? Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes. And then once you've done that, you say, okay, if you would like to do something about your well-being, now that you see your well-being relative to like 250,000 of your peers, because we have these really big data sets. If you want to do something about that, here are the best available interventions that match your well-being need right now. And if you do one of these interventions, we'll measure again in a week and you can see if it changed. You can look at your feedback. And so it was actually giving busy healthcare workers feedback that was the best incentive for retaining their participation in these well-being interventions. And we went hog wild. We turned everything that we do into an opportunity to give people feedback about their well-being. And so it gets them hooked initially, and it gives them a reason to come back and check to see if it improved. And it cost us nothing. Right. So we were thinking about all these elaborate ways of incentivizing, but it turns out, healthcare workers are pretty competitive with themselves. They want to see that they're getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So interesting about how we're motivating our desire for information about ourselves and how we're doing. Can definitely
Right.
be really
Well,
interesting.
and make sure it's evidence-based the way you're going to do that. We want to make sure that there's some legitimacy behind it. But let me go one further. We can ask you 5 questions, like Christina Maslach's like emotional exhaustion questions. These are questions like, I feel burned out from my work. I feel exhausted by my job. I feel I'm working too hard, at my job. Things like that. And I can ask you 5 questions, and then based on your responses, I can give you an emotional exhaustion profile. And we've already identified out of our 21, I guess we have 22 interventions now. Out of all of our interventions, here are the 3 that are most suited for your well-being profile right now. So we can target. It makes it it's not just personal feedback, but it's personal recommendations or strategies for what to do with that feedback. And marrying the feedback and the assessment to the bite-sized next step is what makes it a kind of a personalized, tailored journey. Uh, personalized medicine. This is personalized well-being. It's tailored to the individual.
I love it. I love it. Can't wait to check in another 6 to 12 months and see how it all went. And I think to that, are there, as we sort of wrap things up for this conversation, and you well know I could keep it going for a long, long time, but as we wrap things up for this conversation, and we talked a little bit about the personalized medicine, or excuse me, personalized well-being and micro interventions. Are there other things that are sort of top of mind for you in this sort of front end of your time in this role, that you're really hoping to prioritize and excited see how they unfold?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I don't know how this is gonna go, to be honest, but, um, I think in kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's like well-being needs to be elevated more than it is now.
Mm.
And so I think if we can continue to promote healthcare worker well-being first, and then quality improvement and system change and change management kind of after that, everyone's going to be better off. Because if we continue just to kind of blindly plow forward and say we have to fix all these problems in healthcare without giving people a chance to kind of pause, um, it's gonna. I really do believe it's gonna backfire. Um, um,
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. The phrase that people say to me is, "I'm actively drowning and you're asking me to envision a better future. I need a life preserver, not an exercise in visioning."
Yeah, when you're bobbing to just barely coming up for air every couple of minutes. Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So let's watch this space together.
Absolutely. So important. So important. Well, Brian, thank you so much for this really thought-provoking, insightful, and fun conversation. I hope we can do this again sometime. For our listeners, we always love to hear from you. So please reach out. You can reach us on our website, OWB, at jhmi.edu is our email, and our website as well. So please reach out and let us know if you've got ideas for upcoming podcasts. It'll be hard to top with this one, but we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it for today. If you enjoyed what you heard, please share this podcast with a colleague. And as always, we welcome your feedback.
If there are any topics you'd like to hear about, please email us at owb@jhmi.edu.